and hopefully it's a decent introduction showing you what virtualization is, the various ways it's used, and how you can use it as well. Before we get into that, we're going to start off with our announcements. So tomorrow at 5 p.m., Cybersecurity Club, which is a JSOM student organization, is having a workshop of network security and architecture. This is including Professor Nate Howey, and this is going to be in JSOM 12.222. And then March 26th, 7 p.m. is InfoSec Career in the Davidson Auditorium, and I believe Barrick would like to say a few words about that.
All right. Most of your friends have kind of gotten a flyer. Our goal is to help you get a job in cybersecurity. There's tons of jobs open, but entry level seems to be lacking. You need to spend $1,200 to get a Stuck Plus training. It's hard to read a book and do it yourself. Our goal is to provide cheap certifications, if not free. Our next offerings will be a Metasploit and Wireshark training classes, hopefully hosted here at UT Dallas. We're still working out the concrete details in the near future. The event is from 7 to 9 in the Davidson Auditorium. It's a great place to meet CISOs, CTOs, and industry professionals. They want to meet students, recruit students, and I've already secured an internship through this group. It's a great place to network. Inco's been himself. Any thoughts or questions, concerns?
I mean, it's a really good place, really, to. I know we talk more about technical side, and that's more career side as far as even just branching out to people who are in the field, and they include a mentor program as well.
Yeah, so if you need a mentor, have any questions, which certs to get, which languages to learn, it's a great community for that. Come check it out. I appreciate it. I'll put it up on Handshake soon, and I have flyers down there. Thank you.
All right. And as well, next week we're not meeting as it's spring break for us at UTD. So the following week we're going to have fire talks, and that's where members or the audience have signed up to come up and give a talk about something security related they have accomplished, they've done, a vulnerability they found. We have some excellent talks. We're still leaving that survey open in case anybody else wants to find anything over spring break and talk about it. We'll plan to close it Monday. And we'll be reaching out to people who have already signed up and confirmed with them that they would like to talk still on March 27th. There's the URL for the survey if y'all would like to sign up. And then March 30th, Saturday, Trend Micro with Cybersecurity Club again is doing a hackathon, a CTF. It's a 8-hour event, although the CTF and hackathon is in the last 4 hours after a lunch. I don't have a starting time yet. I'll try to get that to y'all in Discord and announce that when we do the fire talks as well. So we have a Google slide questions if y'all have questions, or feel free to speak up and ask. Although Franco, don't yell at me. And we'll get started into the actual virtualization. So to start off with, what is it? Basically, it's a process of running a virtual instance on a computer system in a layer abstracted from the actual hardware. Might be a little bit technical on that aspect, but kind of to dumb it down, it's really segmentation. You're able to run application meant for a different operating system, or it's isolation even. These are various uses that virtualization comes into hand. How this is accomplished is really through something called a hypervisor. It's a virtual machine monitor. So this monitors the virtual instance. And there are two different types of hypervisors. There are the bare metal, or native, another name is called, or hosted. And to show a graphic here of the two variants, where hosted hardware has the hardware as a base of any OS, and then you have the host OS. Such as me, I'm using Windows. And then you have the hypervisor software. In my case, I use Oracle VM Virtualbox. And then you have the operating systems on top of that. Compared to the bare metal or native architecture, you just have the hardware and then the hypervisor. There's no host OS. The hypervisor directly integrates with the hardware. And then there's the OS on top of the hypervisor as per the hosted architecture. So there are various bare metal or native clients you can use. VMware ESX, which is really commercial license. They have their free version, the ESXi, although that is more limited as it's free, so it doesn't require everything that ESX can do. Then there's a Citrix Zen server, and then Hyper-V on Microsoft. I've used Hyper-V a little bit. I prefer Oracle VM. And then for the hosted side, there's many more than this, but KVM, kernel-based virtual machine. There's VMware and Oracle VM Virtualbox. And then you come into the containers, which don't really host virtual machines, but they host little containers, such as Docker or Kubernetes, that host the containers there. So virtual machines are the guest operating system, and they use the host hardware or resources, but they're running a different OS than your host. And so the hardware and resources are shared. You'll have a virtual hard disk on your actual hard disk, and they'll have RAM dedicated to the guest OS, such that the host no longer has access to the RAM that the guest is been acquired. And then the containers, they're not full independent machines. They're not full operating systems. They're more of an isolated process. They're made to do just particular one thing. As well, you can run more of them versus a full virtual machine, as they are requiring less resources. So for setting up this, there are several guides online, but there are really two things that you should take note when you're setting up a virtual machine, and that's the CPU you're allocating, the number of cores you allocate to the VM, versus your host system. You have a hardware where you have 4 cores. You don't want to allocate all 4 cores to the guest operating system. You're just going to lag up your host and your guest. Nothing will happen. So typically you only want to give half or less to the guest OS, and then the same for RAM. You don't want to allocate too much RAM to the guest, then your host has no RAM and can't do anything either. And as such, as a little demo here, how we have, this is a Fedora using i3. Let me make sure the stream can see this. All right. Oh, I didn't click in. There we go. So I'm running i3. This is Fedora, so I could, I guess. That's not. So this is Linux, whereas I'm running Windows, as you can see in the bottom, the whole taskbar there. This is Linux, so I can do various other things in here if I wanted to. Just as well, and there is Kali, if it will wake up, in here that is running as well. So I'm having 2 a different guest OS operating on top of my host. So how would this be happening per se? Is, well, number one, I have enough RAM to do this along with CPUs that I have allocated to each guest operating system. And within all of these systems, there are settings. So I'm running Fedora clone here. I go to the settings, system, and I'm not sure why that's popping up. So I cannot edit the memory as it is currently running. But basically there's 4 gigs of RAM that I've allocated to Fedora clone. And with processors, I gave it 2 CPUs out of 8. Now then, I did less than half because I'm running more than one guest operating system here. And these are the same settings as for Kali as well. Now then, how per se would you add a virtual machine inside VirtualBox? Well, there are various ways. And there are such thing as an OVA. This is really restricted to VirtualBox. There is a file type for VMware. I don't remember that off the top of my head. But I can double click this OVA. Pardon?
Trying to remove the VMware platform.
VirtualBox.
I know there's a file type that you mentioned.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's no big deal.
And of course, it pops it up over here. So it's trying to import a virtual appliance. So in here, you can see the name, the product, all these descriptions until we get to our CPU and RAM. It's giving it 2 on default and 2 gigs on default. Now I'm going to disable the USB controller. As I believe Kelly throws an error. It might be just particular in my case, but I'm disabling the USB. And that's all I'm going to do. We're going to let it import. Now this takes some time. Now in the other case with an ISO that we had, you can also import that. Let's bring this one. Where I had in the settings here, click storage, and in your controller IDE, after of course you do new, you're going to choose a DVD or CD, drive by the storage, clicking the CD icon and to the right here, and then you'll choose your visual optical disk drive file. I've already selected mine as well. It's in here in a little recent as well. Now then, I also have that one running as well, such that here's this ISO, as if you had a literal hardware system that you plugged in the DVD into, and here's what you start with. So we can go live or install, and you can do the install process just as normal you're doing a fresh install of Windows on as a host OS. So there's all of that. Back to our original thing here, 99%. What do you know? We're almost done. Okay, so that imported. Cancel. So that imported here, where I have one Kali instance here running. Here's another one. There's 2 different versions, 2019 versus the 2018. So again, we're just going to start that. And of course, I have to bring it over. And so this is a fresh install from an OVA file that is downloaded from Offensive Security. As it's running with only 2 cores, it's a little bit slow. Possibly with the 2 gigs of RAM as well, might be limiting there for this guest operating system, but the host is just fine. And a matter of fact, as you can see, my RAM is not even halfway used. I have a little too much RAM. But here we are, where we go root and Tor for the default password. And in a moment it'll boot up again here. And here we are. Another Kali instance, fresh from Offensive Security, where we can do various things. Can't do too much as there's only 2 gigs of RAM dedicated to this guest operating system, but you can still do things, such as CTFs. So to close, we're just going to click X, and we're going to actually power off instead of save the state. I'm not too concerned about this virtual machine as I have another one already that's been updated itself. Anyway, back to our slides here where we continue covering. So it's also important to know vulnerabilities in these guest operating systems and their hypervisor software kernel. As Docker had a really bad vulnerability back in 2014. And then, actually earlier this year in February, again. And also Oracle VM had, Virtualbox had a issue as well this year. And we'll cover those in detail. So to start off with, back in 2014, Docker had the problem where a remote attacker could execute this arbitrary code with root privileges on the host operating system via the guest OS, or the guest container. Now then, this required a crafted image by the attacker or a Docker file in an LZMA archive. So if you had protection prior to this where the attacker can't necessarily upload an image and have it running, then you're fine. The root cause of this was related to the ch root for an archive extraction. And we have a question. Is Cube's OS going to be covered? If not, no big deal. I forgot to bring that in here. I had the thoughts about it, but I did not. So Cube OS is a Linux based operating system, but it's very different in the fact that everything is literally a container, a little virtual container itself. The keyboard is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the keyboard is even wrapped in a container.
Cubes is basically an operating system where everything is a virtual machine, not a container.
Okay.
And so what he means by the keyboard is wrapped in a container, your keyboard has access to one VM, and that is your USB VMs. And so the reason that cubes exists is because it's security by segregation. You're segmenting and segregating your applications from each other so that if something were to happen and someone were to break into one of your VMs, they wouldn't have access to your entire system. So your USB modules have one VM, and those VMs can interact with other VMs if you allow them to. Your networking is split up into 3 or 4 different VMs. You have your outward-facing networking VM. You have your inward
Yeah, so it's just segregating literally everything and only allowing things to interact with us via whatever you specify. So we also have a question of how much RAM do you have? I believe I've already showed that to you. It is a little bit crazy. 32 gigabytes. So, yeah, a little too much here.
How many Chrome tabs can you run?
All of them.
A lot. Probably enough to hide the X's on probably about 5 Windows worth of tabs, if not more. I don't know. I haven't tested that.
I think it's interesting attack. Like launch that many Chrome tabs.
Yeah.
Hey Jace, if you have a Kali VM and you're trying to get your computer in promiscuous mode, and your Wi-Fi card doesn't support it, can you insert a Wi-Fi dongle, and then put the VM to connect to that dongle with your Wi-Fi, and then put it in promiscuous mode?
Yes. Yes, you can specify which network adapter you want your guest OS to be attached to.
So that would be the easiest way if you didn't have Kali on your computer and you didn't have a good Wi-Fi card.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like for example here, that's still running. The humbug. So we enable another network adapter, and that's it. There's something here that allows you to specify which. So I believe it would be here, bridged adapter, where you connect directly to that dongle that you've plugged in. If you're not busy playing with whatever.
It might also be under USB permissions too. You have to be careful about that.
It might be. Well, I think the host OS would realize that it is a network adapter, so it should be listed under here. I'm pretty sure, but that would be that. All right, so to the February 2019, not necessarily restricted to Docker, as it was a run C vulnerability, but Docker was a main user of it. So this was the run C through the 1.0-RC6. And so it allows the attackers to overwrite the host run C binary. Now again, this does require a attacker controlled image, whether if they've crafted this, uploaded it, and started it, or the attacker had access to images you are running as if they were an employee or something like that. And this was caused by the file descriptor mishandling related to the proc self exe. And then lastly here, we're coming to the Oracle VM Virtualbox, something I use. So there were versions affected prior to 5.2.26. I'm currently using .26 and prior to 6.02. This allows the unauthenticated attacker to use SOAP to gain access and compromise the VirtualBox itself. So this would result in an unauthorized ability to cause a hang or frequently repeatable crashed, kind of just crashed VMs and whatnot that wouldn't start up or just crash all the time. So, I mean, it's important to also have these secured. If there are no more questions, any more questions on anything?
Have you virtualized networking before?
I've done just a host-only network using like the Metasploitable 2. and Cali, just so that they only spoke to each other. But other than that, no. Alrighty, no more questions. Then if you haven't signed in, if you'll please do so. Other than that, y'all have a wonderful night.